All right. So first things first, how did you get approached to get involved with Space Jam?
Warner Brothers approached me. I had just done, I think, a movie called Day for them, and they were very happy with me, and always thought of the Looney Tunes as their crown jewels, they used to call them,
Mm-hmm.
and knew that they had to be updated. Uh, the Michael Jordan sort of Looney Tunes commercials that Pitka had directed had been very popular on television, and they thought it. They asked if I would look into that as a way of sort of finding a new feature film to go with that. And just about this time, Michael Jordan had gone into baseball,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought, well, that's a perfect idea, or at least he was going to return. I think by the time we started writing, he was already thinking about returning to basketball, and I thought, well, let's just make it that it's because of the Looney Tunes that he decided to go back to basketball, and really that was the gist of it. And I think I started working on a script with the guys, with the writers. The studio greenlit really quickly.
Mm-hmm. But we actually spoke to Joe a few weeks ago, and he was saying there were some issues, like you said, that the Looney Tunes are Warner Brothers crown jewels with, just wanting to keep the integrity of the characters at the same time between, animation and the script, correct?
Yes, of course, and keeping the integrity and also finding new voices to do them. After Mel Blanc died, I thought that the voices of those characters didn't have the energy and bite that Mel Blanc had brought to them,
Mm-hmm.
and I knew I was going to have to find some new people. I was going to recast those voices, and I spent a lot of time doing that.
I think it worked out pretty well.
Thank you.
Do you
Yeah,
have?
I think the best find was Billy West.
Yeah.
Was working with Howard Stern, and he did a wonderful couple. I think he did Bugs, and I'm trying to remember what he did now.
I think
I
it
haven't
was
looked
Daffy
into the
also.
movie in about 20 years. But anyway, you'll know more about it. You can fill in the
Mm-hmm.
accurate fact for me.
For sure. Do you have any particularly weird or wonderful memories from the set?
Um, I think it was my weirdest was the meeting Charles Barkley for the first time, and we're
Mm.
getting ready. Pitka was definitely the director of the movie, but in fact, I was the director of the movie because I ended up doing all the animation, all the sort of voices, and then when it came to the big game between the All Stars and the real basketball players, and I ended up doing most of that stuff, particularly the stuff with Bill Murray. And so I'm sitting around with Barkley and all the guys, and Barkley turns to me and he says, "So you're the big boss?" And I said, "I don't know if that's what you'd call me, but I'm sort of in charge." And he says, "Have you ever worked at a film where somebody took a punch at you?" I just sort of looked at him for a second. I said, "I wonder what he's trying to do." And I said, "No, not. It's never happened to me." He says, "Oh, okay. I just wondered." And he couldn't have been more friendly after that. It was just like, I don't know if that was kind of a goof, if he was actually curious, if people got into fights, or if it was kind of some weird act of intimidation.
Maybe for all we know, that was his method acting. That was him trying to rally himself up to play the game. It's funny you say that because Joe had talked to us and he had said that he had some issues with creative control on the film and animation as well. Did you have any issues working with him particularly, or?
No, I mean, he traditionally has creative control on a commercial as much as the director has creative control, because really it's finally the product that has creative control. And on this movie, certainly Warner Brothers had creative control, and they ceded it to me, and because I was the experienced filmmaker that they were working with.
Mm-hmm.
look, Joe did a great job, and he's the one who really created this form of working with Jordan and these characters. But he had never worked in anything beyond a 60-second form. Well, he had made one feature before that, but he didn't have a lot of long storytelling experience, and there's a certain kind of schedule you have to sort of follow, and I think I was much more used to all of that, and so he seemed, and he was very respectful of me. He knew of my credits, and we had no problem, and basically I had hired him, so there was no sort of artistic disagreement that I remember. I mean, every once in a while, he would do some unusual shot, and I would suggest that he also do a much more straightforward shot in terms of getting certain kinds of coverage.
I mean, something he talked about also was kind of like piecing the script together so that it was, a concise and well-formed script. Would you say that's true to a certain extent, or?
But we certainly wanted to do that, and what was his point?
He was saying he kind of, he brought the whole story together and also, added its charisma with given pop culture references and goofs and whatnot.
I'm sure he did all that as well. I mean, I don't know. There were a lot of people involved, and he did it, I did it. I think we had an extraordinary musical guy, who had a lot of sort of great music things.
Sure. I mean, let's talk about the music. I think personally, besides James Newton Howard's score, I think the soundtrack itself is one of the best soundtrack of the 90s. And I think with your films in particular, whether it's the Ghostbusters theme or having Bobby Brown and Run DMC on the sequel or whatever, even with the new Ghostbusters, with a lot of your films, there's just been such great musical moments. Could you talk a bit about that particular aspect of the marketing?
We particularly went after a lot of the great black stars of that period, and there were lots of them, and everybody wanted to be involved. So everybody was kind of submitting songs, and we had a really interesting time of figuring out when, what songs to go with, where we could use the various great songs that we had.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think people don't realize.
And we really had a spectacular group.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whether it was Seal redoing something or
R. Kelly.
I can't even remember all this.
People don't realize that album has, I think, a handful of top 5 hits, and then if they weren't,
right,
chart toppers, then they're still on rotation in people's phones or people's playlists and what have you.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, no, it's spectacular.
And then the other aspect of the marketing in the film, which I found interesting, which Joe talked about a bit also, was would you say to a certain extent that the film was almost mismarketed towards children?
No, I think they wanted to get a big, broad. I think the Looney Tunes is basically a family audience, and I think they were trying to look. By putting Bill Murray into the film, we were clearly going for a more sophisticated kind of teenage adult audience along with kids. But what we were telling the family audience is this is not only for your 6 to 10-year-old, this is also good for you.
Mm-hmm. I mean, but at the same time, I've grown up with this film from when I was a baby to now that I'm 20. And, watching it more and more in recent years, I noticed a lot of just wildly unsuitable jokes for children. Even when the aliens are collecting their powers, there's a very subtle masturbation joke.
Yeah, well, if you go, it's the same thing with Ghostbusters, which is generally thought of as a great family movie and has hung in as a great family film for 35 years now. I think people really appreciate, as long as you don't go over the line. We just try to make it really funny.
Sure. I think he succeeded. I mean, there's a reason people watch it 20 years later. What are some of the reasons you think people love Space Jam so many years later?
I think the Looney Tunes, first of all, really were one of the great sort of historical animation characters. I think they were way hipper than the Disney characters of that period, from the like period. They were always they're the wild boys. And, I think Mel Blanc and all the great animators of the 1950s that came out of the Warner stable just did a great job with those sort of 10-minuters that played in front of movies and stuff. And so I think there was an enormous amount of love for that. Michael Jordan is really the greatest basketball player in history, and he had extraordinary charisma. He still does, but particularly at that moment in time. So I think our timing was very good. And I think the fact that we were able to add some of the great basketball players of that era, that we added Bill Murray to it, and Keith Knight, is that his name?
Wayne Knight?
Wayne Knight, who was very popular.
Yeah. Arguably only popular in the 90s.
Who made a great foil. And, there's just a lot of good stuff in it. And, of course, a spectacular music track. I agree with you. I think it's one of the great music tracks of the decade. And it's probably has been underappreciated for how good the music is.
Yeah, absolutely. So
I think, all in all, I think it did very well. I think everybody's very happy with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was my next question, actually. Can you talk a bit more about your initial reaction when the film comes out? You have incredibly high box office numbers, but yet at the same time, the critics are kind of having mixed reviews.
I think, comedies, Ghostbusters got crappy reviews when it first came out. Stripes, and Animal House got terrible reviews initially. They're now thought of as classics. It's too easy to criticize comedies, and they're usually over the heads of the reviewers and of a different generation. And it happens all the time. It's by definition an unsophisticated movie, and is meant to be.
Mm-hmm.
They're very sophisticated in terms of the construction of the humor, but not sophisticated in its storytelling. And so there's a tendency to, undervalue how great certain movies are.
I think there's almost a certain pattern with films you've been involved with, though, that they just kind of, attain this cult status to them, whether it's something like Space Jam, Ghostbusters, or even Junior. There's just this almost ahead of its time aura to them that they don't get the true love they deserve until years later.
Well, just to set the record straight, in fact, I've been very fortunate. The movies have done extraordinarily well when they first came out. Almost all the movies, except for Junior that you mentioned, were big hits initially, and a lot more of them. So it's not that. It's just I think what's been remarkable is that they've hung on. That they don't go out of style, both in terms of their storytelling, in terms of the comedy, the use of music, and just the tone of the movies don't feel outdated, 20 years after you see them. So movies like Animal House and Stripes, of course Ghostbusters, play as well today as they did when they first came out, and they've garnered a lot of love. And I've been very lucky. I've got about a dozen movies like that, including Space Jam, that sort of still, people really have held close to their hearts.
Absolutely.
I just feel very fortunate.
Mm-hmm. With all this nostalgia comes Space Jam 2. What are your thoughts on that project? Something they should do? Something they should stay away from?
I thought they did another Looney Tune.
Yeah. Were you ever involved with another idea for a Space Jam 2? Because Joe had talked about this idea with Tiger Woods, and then I know there were other ideas with more Michael involved. Was there ever something presented to you?
I had another Michael idea, but I was never involved in the Tiger Woods version.
Can you talk a bit more about that?
I was not involved, and and I wasn't involved in the movie that got made with I can't remember his name.
Steve Martin, like the Looney Tunes Back in Action one.
Who's the main actor in that?
Oh, Brandon. What's his name? Fuck.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, I didn't think. I thought that was really misguided, and I thought the tone.
Yeah, well, I think that's why they stopped making Looney Tunes movies for years after.
Yeah, I think they hurt themselves, and they've sort of never come back with another one. I mean, they own it. Unlike many of my other films where I'm sort of a co-owner, because this was a Looney Tunes movie, this was really theirs.
What can you talk a bit more about your other idea with Michael? How do you take it from how Space Jam ends to, coming about with the sequel?
I don't remember. I really don't. It's about 15 years ago, and I can't remember the script at all.
Sure. What's some advice you could give in order to succeed with a project like Space Jam 2?
Well, I think they have to get the Looney Tunes right, and they have to be true to their roots. You have to have a plot in it that it jumps past kind of a standard good guy, bad guy thing. It has to sort of have some kind of hyper spin on it, the way we were sort of creating the true background story to Michael Jordan quitting baseball, quitting basketball for baseball, and then finally coming back. I think that gave it a kind of a raison d'etre that went beyond sort of a standard film.
Sure. What is one thing you would like people to take away from Space Jam when they see it?
I think it's pretty joyful and funny, and I think it's kind of a rock concert when you watch it. I remember the premiere screening we had in New York. People were getting up and cheering, and when they finally won the game, the audience basically stood up as if the movie was over and started to leave as if they were at an actual game, even though there was 5 more minutes of movie to play.
Well, it's funny you say that. I saw it. There's a music festival here that does some movie screenings, and they did a screening of Space Jam in the McGill gym, and it was a very similar reaction.
Right. Cool.
All right, and so what's next for you? I know you're working on a lot of Ghost Corps related projects. Is there anything we can expect in terms of you directing in the near future?
Yeah, the next thing I'm going to do is to direct. I have a movie called Baywatch, which I produced, which is coming out in May. And after that...
Bastards, right?
And Bastards, too. They're both films that we made last year that are coming out. But I'm hoping to direct, and probably will direct, a movie called The Summer of Love, which is kind of a personal story from 1967 and the summer of 1967, which is a musical.
Great. Wow. That's nice. What's the status of something like Triplets at this point?
Trying to get a script.
Yeah? Oh, okay, great. Is Eddie Murphy still involved as far as you're concerned, or?
Yes.
Great. And what about Ghostbusters 2? Is that something you guys are still trying to pursue at this point, or?
There's going to be many other Ghostbuster movies, and they're just in development right now.
Great. I'm looking forward to it. All right, last question. This is my signature sign-off question. Ivan, what is the meaning of life?
I think the meaning of life is taking joy with every moment, out of every moment.
Great. Thank you so much for your time. And also, and I mean this in the best way possible, thank you for making me weird. If it weren't for your creative endeavors, I wouldn't have turned out how I am, and I am so grateful for everything you have done for the culture. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and you're welcome, I guess.
I mean that from the bottom of my heart, and I know it sounds weird on the forefront, but I mean it in the nicest way possible.
Great. Nice talking to you.
Thank you, Ivan.
Bye, Max.
That's all, folks.